On December 4, 1872, a British ship spotted a vessel drifting off the Azores. Her sails were torn, her wheel unmanned, and not a soul was aboard. 10 people had vanished. The cargo sat untouched. By the end of this file you will know which theory the evidence actually supports. The North Atlantic, the 4th of December, 1872. 400 miles east of the Azores, and nearly as far from Portugal, a stretch of ocean where ships pass and nothing is supposed to happen. The British brigantine Dei Gratia is 3 weeks out of New York, bound for Gibraltar with petroleum in her hold. Her captain, David Morehouse, has crossed this ocean more times than he can count. At 1 in the afternoon, the helmsman lifts his eyes from the compass and sees a sail, perhaps 5 miles off the port bow. Nothing unusual in that. This is a shipping lane. Sails are company. But sailors read ships the way farmers read weather, and something in this one reads wrong. She isn't holding a line. She wanders, swings, corrects herself too late, like a sentence losing its meaning. Through the glass the details sharpen and get stranger. She is a brigantine, about their own size, carrying almost no canvas, just a jib and a foretopmast staysail, set on the starboard tack. That is not how anyone sails an ocean. With so little sail she can barely steer, and the wind keeps taking her head, pushing her bow around until she's pointing the wrong way entirely. He waits for the small human corrections every ship shows. A tightened sheet, a turn of the wheel, a figure crossing the deck. They never come. No one is steering her, no one at all. He calls the second mate, John Wright, who looks and looks again, and sends for the captain. Morehouse comes up, takes the glass, and stands very still, saying nothing for a long moment. A ship in distress runs up a flag. A ship in trouble hails, fires a gun, does something. This one only wanders, silent sails, slatting against the masts, as if crewed by the wind alone. Morehouse alters course toward her. It costs him time he cannot easily spare, but the law of the sea is older than schedules. You do not pass a ship that may hold dying men. For nearly 2 hours the Dei Gratia closes the distance. And for nearly 2 hours the stranger gives back nothing. No flag, no answer to their hail, no movement anywhere along her rail. The weather for once is almost kind. The gales that have battered both ships for weeks have finally eased, leaving a heavy rolling swell, the sea's long memory of violence finished somewhere over the horizon. Close enough now, they can read the wrongness plainly. Ropes hang loose over her sides, trailing in the water. One sail has blown out and hangs in ribbons. Her rigging droops slack, like something set down mid-task. And on her stern, weathered but legible, a name, Mary Celeste, of New York. The same harbor the Dei Gratia sailed from. She had left it just 8 days ahead of them. Morehouse hails her again across the swell. The only reply is the ship herself. Canvas slapping, blocks knocking, water gurgling somewhere within. The sounds a vessel makes when no one tells her to stop. He orders the small boat lowered. First mate Oliver Deveau will board her, with John Wright and a seaman at the oars. 3 men rowing toward a ship that has stopped answering questions. The crossing takes minutes that feel longer. With each stroke the Mary Celeste rises above them, hull streaked with weed and salt, rolling in the swell with the loose indifferent motion of a thing unmanned. Deveau circles her once, reading her waterline, calling out as sailors do. No face appears at the rail, no dog barks, no smoke rises from the galley stovepipe, nothing answers but the sea. They come alongside above them. Everything a working ship should be doing, steering, trimming, watching, is simply not being done, and has not been done. They will soon learn for many days and many 100 miles. Deveau stands, balances against the roll and reaches up. His fingers close on the cold rail of the Mary Celeste, and with that touch, he steps into a question the world has never answered. Before she was a mystery, she was timber and tar. In the spring of 1861, on the shore of Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, a small community of shipwrights raised a hull from local wood. They named her Amazon. She was a brigantine, 2 masts, roughly 100 feet of deck, built for the ordinary commerce of the North Atlantic. Nothing about her launch suggested anything remarkable. Her first captain was a local man, Robert McClellan. He took command for her maiden voyage, and almost immediately fell gravely ill. Within days he was dead, before the Amazon had truly begun her working life. It is the kind of detail that later storytellers would seize upon. A captain dying at the very start of a ship's career sounds like an omen. In 1861 it was simply a tragedy, and business continued. The new master stepped aboard, and the Amazon went to work. For 6 years she did what small brigantines do, carried cargo between ports, earned her keep, weathered the routine hazards of a crowded coastline. Those hazards left their marks. Her early years brought minor collisions and scrapes, the kind of accidents that were common currency in the age of sail, dutifully logged, repaired at the next port, and forgotten. Then, in 1867 came real damage. A storm drove her ashore at Cape Breton Island, off Nova Scotia's coast. She grounded hard enough that her owners wrote her off as a wreck. But a stranded hull is not a dead ship. She was salvaged and sold, then sold again, passing between hands until in 1868, she crossed a quieter border. Her registry changed from British to American. With the new flag came a new name. The Amazon of Nova Scotia became the Mary Celeste of New York. It is the name history would remember, though nobody could have known that yet. Sailors' folklore has long held that renaming a ship invites misfortune. Remember that belief. It tells us less about the sea than about how legends get assembled piece by piece, always in hindsight. Because at the time, the renaming was pure paperwork. Ships changed names and flags constantly. To the merchants along New York's waterfront, the Mary Celeste was simply an asset, a modest vessel with work ahead. She spent the following years in ordinary trade, changing owners more than once. Nothing in the surviving record marks her out. She was one hull among thousands threading the Atlantic's crowded commercial lanes. Then, in 1872, her latest owners made an investment. The Mary Celeste went into the yard for a major refit, one that substantially enlarged her, raising her capacity and reshaping her for ocean work. She emerged bigger, sounder, and more valuable than she had ever been. Whatever the Amazon had suffered in her first decade, the ship that left that refit was, in practical terms, close to new. Later writers would not see it that way. Looking back, they arranged her record into a pattern. The dead captain, the collisions, the wreck at Cape Breton, the supposedly forbidden change of name. They called her a cursed ship, unlucky from the keel up, marked for tragedy from her first day in the water. It makes a satisfying story. It is also plainly legend-making after the fact. Read forward instead of backward. Her history is unremarkable. A working brigantine with a working ship's share of accidents, no stranger than hundreds of her sisters plying the same dangerous ordinary trade. Curses are built in reverse. Once a ship becomes famous for a mystery, every scratch in her past is relit as an omen. The Amazon's misfortunes only became prophecy after the Mary Celeste became a riddle. Strip the legend away, and what remains is almost disappointingly solid. A well-built Nova Scotia hull, refitted and enlarged, insured and inspected, lying at a New York pier in the autumn of 1872. She was waiting for a cargo and for a captain. The man who came aboard was experienced, respected and devout, and he was bringing his family with him. His name was Benjamin Briggs. Before the Mary Celeste became a riddle, she was a home, briefly, to 10 living people. It is worth pausing here before the mystery begins to meet them as they were, not legends but neighbors. Her captain was Benjamin Spooner Briggs, 37 years old, of Marion, Massachusetts, a small seafaring town where the tide governed everything, and where the Briggs family had given generations of its sons to the ocean. His father, Captain Nathan Briggs, had commanded ships before him, and most of Benjamin's brothers followed the sea as well. In Marion, this was not adventure. It was the family trade, steady and respectable as farming. Those who knew Benjamin described a serious, upright man, devout in his faith, abstemious in his habits. He did not drink. He kept a Bible aboard, and his ships were known as orderly, sober vessels. He had earned his rank the honest way, years of hard sailing, then command of the schooner Forest King, the bark Arthur, the brigantine Seafoam. By 1872, he was an experienced and well-respected master. That autumn he bought a share in the Mary Celeste herself, a part owner now, not merely a hired captain. The voyage to Genoa was an investment in his own future, and he prepared it carefully. With him came his wife, Sarah Elizabeth, a minister's daughter, he had known nearly all his life. Theirs was, by every surviving account, a warm marriage. Her letters home are full of gentle humor and affection. Sarah brought her melodeon aboard, a small reed organ, so there would be music on the long Atlantic evenings. It is a tender detail to hold on to, hymns and songs rising from a cabin at sea. And she brought their daughter, Sophia Matilda, just 2 years old, a small solemn-eyed child in the one photograph that survives. She would spend the voyage on the cabin floor, under her mother's constant watch. But their son Arthur, 7 years old, stayed behind in Marion with his grandmother, so his schooling would not be interrupted. He said goodbye to his parents and baby sister, expecting, as everyone did, to see them again. From New York days before sailing, Benjamin wrote to his mother, telling her, "Our vessel is in beautiful trim," and hoping for a fine passage. It was the last letter she would ever receive from him. The crew of 7 was chosen with equal care. First Mate Albert Richardson, 28, a Maine man, had sailed under Briggs before and held his full trust, a capable officer, married, well regarded by everyone who knew him. The second mate was Andrew Gilling, about 25, a New Yorker of Danish descent. Those who gave testimony about him afterward remembered a quiet, dependable young man building a solid, unremarkable career upon the water. Edward Head, the steward and cook, was newly married and living in Brooklyn. He kept the ship's small galley. His young wife, like Arthur Briggs, expected the ordinary things, a letter from Genoa, then a homecoming. The 4 remaining seamen were German, experienced sailors from the Frisian Islands off the North Sea coast, men raised much like the Briggs family themselves, in communities where going to sea was simply what one did. 2 of them were brothers, Volkert and Bos Lorenzen, from the island of Fur. They had followed the sea since boyhood and shipped together when they could. 2 names entered side by side on the crew list. Arian Martins and Gottlieb Gutschard completed the company. When investigators later traced the German sailors' reputations, the answers came back consistent. Sober men, steady men, peaceable men. Not one carried any record of trouble. This matters, because every dark theory about the Mary Celeste, mutiny, murder, drunken violence must first get past those testimonials. Every soul aboard was vouched for, by the sworn word of people who actually knew them. So picture them in the first days of November 1872. A careful captain, his wife at her melodeon, a toddler playing below, 7 working sailors, 10 ordinary lives converging quietly on one small, well-kept ship. They were real, and they were loved. Letters would wait for them in Genoa. A 7-year-old boy waited in Marion. Whatever happened out on the Atlantic happened to them. Hold their names close as the story darkened. New York City, the first week of November, 1872. Pier 50 juts into the East River, forested with masts. Under a cold gray sky, stevedores roll barrel after barrel down the planks toward a small, tidy brigantine. 1,701 barrels are lowered into the hold of the Mary Celeste. Inside them, raw industrial alcohol, bound for Genoa, where merchants will use it to fortify wine, a routine cargo and a dangerous one. Look closely at those barrels, because they matter. Most are coopered from white oak, dense, tight-grained, the shipping standard of the age. White oak holds liquid the way a vault holds gold. Almost nothing escapes. But 9 of them are different. 9 barrels, somewhere in that stack of 1,700, are made of red oak instead, a wood that looks nearly identical and behaves nothing alike. Red oak is porous. Its grain is threaded with open channels. Tiny capillaries running the length of every stave. Fill a red oak barrel with alcohol and slowly, invisibly, the cargo begins to seep, not as liquid, but as vapor. No one on Pier 50 notices. Why would they? The barrels are sound, the heads are tight, and 9 flawed casks among 1,700 is a detail no manifest records. They go down into the dark with the rest. And here is the thing about alcohol at sea, it breathes. When the temperature rises, it expands, forcing fumes out through every imperfect seam. When the cold returns, it contracts, and the hold inhales. Expansion, contraction, breath. Benjamin Briggs understands the risk. Alcohol cargoes were known hazards in 1872. Flammable, fume-heavy, unforgiving of sparks. The hatches will stay battened. No open flame goes near that hold. He is careful. He is always careful. By early November, the loading is done, the paperwork signed, the cargo insured. Down in the sealed hold, 1,700 barrels sit shoulder to shoulder in the gloom, and 9 of them are already whispering fumes into the air. On November 5th, the Mary Celeste slips her moorings and moves down the East River. But the weather ahead is ugly, a hard wind working the outer harbor, and Briggs is not a man who gambles with a new command. So he waits for 2 days. The brigantine lies at anchor off Staten Island, tugging gently at her chain while the wind howls past the Narrows. A prudent delay, a captain doing everything right. It is here, riding at anchor, that Sarah Briggs writes her last letter home. She addresses it to her mother-in-law in Marion, Massachusetts, filling the page with small, warm, ordinary news. The ship is in fine trim, she reports. The crew seems quiet and capable. Little Sophia is well toddling about the cabin. If the weather cooperates, they will be off at last. She signs it, seals it, sends it ashore. It is the last message anyone on that ship will ever send. Ordinary words written in an ordinary hand, carried ashore in a pilot boat, and every line of it unaware. On the morning of November 7th, 1872, the wind finally eases. The anchor comes up streaming harbor mud, canvas climbs the masts, and the Mary Celeste stands out through the Narrows toward the open Atlantic. 10 souls aboard, a captain of spotless reputation, a first mate he trusts, a crew of sober, experienced sailors, a wife, a 2-year-old girl, a melodeon, and 1,701 breathing barrels below their feet. The North Atlantic in November is not a gentle place. Gales stack up off the American coast and march eastward, one behind another. Briggs knows what is coming. He has crossed in November before. He sails anyway. 8 days behind her, another vessel is loading in New York Harbor, a Nova Scotian brigantine called the Dei Gratia, bound across the same ocean on nearly the same track. Remember her name, she will matter. As the American coastline sinks below the horizon, picture the hold one more time. Cold darkness, the creak of timber, rows of barrels shifting microscopically with every swell, and 9 of them, quietly, steadily, letting their cargo escape. 9 porous barrels in a sealed wooden hold, breathing with every swing of temperature. Hold on to that detail. Months from now, when this cargo is finally unloaded in Genoa, someone will count the empty barrels. The number will be 9. On the 15th of November, 1872, a second ship slipped her moorings in New York Harbor. Her name was Dei Gratia. By the grace of God, she would earn that name before the year was out. She was a brigantine, British-flagged, built of Nova Scotia timber, a working vessel much like the one that had cleared this same harbor days before. Nothing about her departure suggested that history was watching. Her master was David Reed Morehouse, a Nova Scotian in his mid-30s, a captain with years of Atlantic crossings behind him and a reputation for steadiness. He expected an ordinary voyage. Petroleum out, cargo home. Below her hatches sat barrels of petroleum, bound east across the ocean toward Gibraltar, where she would call for orders. It was routine freight on a routine run, the quiet commerce of the age of sail. And here the coincidence begins. 8 days earlier, the Mary Celeste had taken the same road, New York, the open Atlantic, Gibraltar's narrow gate. 2 ships, 1 route, separated by only a week and a day. There is a story, often repeated, never proven, that Benjamin Briggs and David Morehouse knew each other, that on the evening before Briggs sailed, the 2 captains sat down and dined together in New York. Some accounts place that dinner at the Astor House, 2 shipmasters sharing a table, talking cargoes and weather, unaware of what the ocean was preparing. It is a haunting image. It is also unverified. No letter confirms it, no ledger, no diary, no testimony given under oath. The dinner may have happened, captains in the same trade crossed paths constantly, or it may be a detail added later because it fit. What is documented beyond any doubt is the weather. November 1872 was a brutal month on the North Atlantic. Ship after ship, port after port, the records agree. Gale followed gale across the ocean road. Logbooks from vessels scattered along those sea lanes tell the same story. Heavy winds, mountainous seas, canvas shortened and shortened again. Any ship crossing that month took a beating. Every ship crossing that month took a beating. The Mary Celeste's own log, later recovered, records it plainly. Days of hard weather as she fought her way east. Briggs working his small crew through wind and heavy sea toward the distant Azores. 8 days behind her, the Dei Gratia met the same ocean. Morehouse would later describe stormy weather on his own crossing. The same systems, the same gray marching seas, rolling over the same stretch of water. Picture the Atlantic as a road, not a trackless waste, but a highway, winds and currents funneling sailing ships along familiar corridors. 2 brigantines from one harbor bound the same way would naturally follow one track. So there is nothing sinister on its face. In their shared course, later, suspicion would fasten on exactly this closeness, but in November 1872, it was simply how the traffic of the sea moved. Day after day, the 2 ships ran east through the gales, unseen by each other, separated by hundreds of miles of heaving water. One carried alcohol and a family, the other carried petroleum, and soon a question. Aboard the Dei Gratia, the routine held, watches changed, sails were trimmed, positions pricked on the chart. Among her officers was the first mate, Oliver Deveau, a strong, capable seaman whose name history was about to learn. None of them knew what lay ahead on their track. None of them could know that the ship 8 days in front had already written her last recorded position, the Azores fading somewhere behind her. The mathematics of the sea were quietly closing the gap. The Mary Celeste, as we shall see, had slowed or stopped answering to anyone at all. The Dei Gratia, driving on through the weather, was catching up. This is how a witness is made, not by choosing, but by arriving. Of all the ships on the winter Atlantic, this one, her captain perhaps a friend, her route nearly identical, would be the one to find her. On the 4th of December 1872, the helmsman of the Dei Gratia would lift his eyes and see a sail on the horizon moving strangely. 8 days behind had become no distance at all. The two roads were about to meet. Oliver Deveau went below with a lamp and a seaman's eye, and what he found he later swore to under oath, not rumor, not legend, an inventory item by item of a ship without a crew. Start with the water, roughly 3.5 feet of it, dark and shifting in the hold. That sounds alarming, and it is a lot, but for a sound brigantine, it was nowhere near sinking. The pumps told a stranger story. One stood functional, ready to work. The other had been taken apart, its valve drawn as if someone had been sounding the well trying to learn how much water was really there. Above deck, the hatches disagreed with each other. The fore-hatch lay open, the lazarette hatch open, but the main hatch, the one sealed over the alcohol cargo, remained battened down, exactly as it should be. By the wheel, the binnacle had been knocked from its place, and the compass inside it was smashed. A small ruin, easy to overlook, but a ship's compass does not break itself. Then the absence that mattered most. The Mary Celeste carried a single small boat, a yawl, lashed across the main hatch. It was gone, and it had not been torn away by any wave. A section of the ship's rail had been deliberately removed to launch it. Hands did that. Human hands, working with purpose, sliding a small boat into the open Atlantic. And there was the halyard. The main peak halyard, a stout rope meant to hoist sail, was found frayed and parted, a long length of it missing or trailing. Some would wonder, had it been paid out behind the ship? If so, the picture sharpens into something almost unbearable. A small boat, tethered to its mothership by a single rope, riding behind her, and then the rope parts. Below in the captain's cabin, the pattern continued, the sextant gone, the chronometer gone, the navigation book and the ship's papers gone. The instruments a master needs to find his way across an ocean. Whoever left this vessel did not flee blindly. Someone paused, gathered the tools of survival and navigation, and carried them into the boat. This was an evacuation, hurried perhaps, but not mindless. Yet the ship's log stayed behind, resting where a log should rest, and with it the working slate, its last line chalked the morning of November 25th, about 6 miles off Santa Maria, in the Azores. After that line of routine positions and weather, nothing. The log simply stops. Between that last entry and the moment Deveau stepped aboard, the Mary Celeste kept sailing, and no one wrote a word. The stores made the mystery worse, not better. 6 months of provisions sat in her hold, fresh water in her casks. No starving crew abandons a ship stocked like that. And scattered through the forecastle lay the crew's own belongings. Oilskins hanging where they were left, sea boots standing in pairs, pipes and tobacco resting where their owners set them down. Any sailor of that era would tell you, a seaman does not willingly leave his oilskins, his boots, his pipe. Those men walked away from everything they owned, into a boat barely 20 feet long. Now here is where we must stop the legend before it starts. You have heard about the warm meals on the cabin table, the tea still steaming in its cups, breakfast half-eaten, abandoned mid-bite. None of it is true. No such scene appears in Deveau's testimony, or in any inquiry record. The boiling tea, the warm food, those details were invented later, by writers polishing a mystery into a ghost story. The documented reality needs no embellishment. There was no sign of violence anywhere aboard. No fire, no struggle. The cargo, as far as the boarders could tell, sat apparently intact beneath that sealed main hatch. So this is the true inventory. A wet but seaworthy ship, a missing boat, missing instruments, a silent log, and 10 souls gone. The question Deveau could not answer is the one we ask next: why? Every ship keeps a log, and most logs are monuments to boredom. Wind, weather, distance run. The Mary Celeste's log is no different, which is precisely what makes its silence so loud. Read backward from the end. The entries tell an ordinary story. 2 weeks out of New York, the brigantine fought hard November weather. Gales stacking out of the west, seas breaking across her deck. Briggs shortened sail and drove her on. The log records the routine grammar of a rough crossing. Reefed canvas, heavy swells, the pumps worked, and the ship answering. Difficult, yes. Dangerous, no. Ordinary. For days the Atlantic gave them nothing but labor, and then, as they closed on the Azores, it relented. The entries soften, the wind eases, the seas moderate. The worst was behind them. On November 24th, the last full entry in the logbook proper. Position, weather, nothing remarkable. A ship doing what ships do, a master recording it the way masters had for centuries. Then the slate. Ships kept a working slate on deck, rough notes, chalked in the moment, copied into the book later. On the Mary Celeste's slate, one final line was never copied. It never would be. November 25th, 8 o'clock in the morning. The eastern point of Santa Maria, southernmost island of the Azores, bearing south-southwest, about 6 miles distant. That is the last word the Mary Celeste ever spoke. 6 miles. Hold that number in your mind. On a clear morning, 6 miles is nothing at sea. Santa Maria's cliffs would have stood plainly on the horizon. Green slopes, breaking surf, houses, other human beings. Whoever chalked that line was doing normal work on a normal morning, fixing a position off a familiar landmark on a familiar route. Nothing in the entry hurries, nothing warns. Then the record simply stops. Now move the calendar forward to December 4th. On that afternoon, the crew of the Dei Gratia sighted a brigantine steering strangely, out on the long stretch of open ocean between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. The position matters enormously. She was found roughly 400 miles east of that last chalked bearing off Santa Maria, 400 miles of open Atlantic beyond the morning her log went silent. Do the arithmetic and it refuses to soften. Between the last entry and the discovery lie 9, perhaps 10 days. For 9 or 10 days the Mary Celeste sailed on with no one aboard. And she could have. Investigators traced it with her sails as found, some still drawing, some blown out. The prevailing winds could push an unmanned ship along a wandering, drunken, but entirely plausible drift toward exactly where she was met. She would have yawed and staggered, come up into the wind and fallen off again, losing way and finding it, a ship steering herself badly, the way ships do when no hand rests on the wheel. That drift is evidence. It means she wasn't abandoned near Portugal. Days later, in some crisis we could place close to her discovery. It means the ship crossed those 400 miles alone. Which forces the conclusion at the heart of this entire case. Whatever happened to the 10 people aboard the Mary Celeste happened on, or very shortly after the morning of November 25, 1872. Happened, in other words, within sight of land, not in mid-ocean emptiness, not in a screaming gale, but on a moderating sea, with the cliffs of Santa Maria standing 6 miles off the beam. Benjamin Briggs could see a place where his family would be safe. Sarah could see it. Perhaps 2-year-old Sophia was lifted up to look at the island, land after 18 hard days, almost there. And in that place, in sight of harbor, in easing weather, with the hardest sailing already behind them, something made 10 people leave a sound, provisioned seaworthy ship, or made the ship leave them behind. The log's last line is not a cry for help. It is a bearing and a distance, chalked by a steady hand at 8 in the morning. Everything we cannot know begins one breath after it. Gibraltar, December 1872. The Dei Gratia's prize slips into harbor under a salvage crew's hands, and within hours the Mary Celeste passes from the sea's custody into the courts. Here, the mystery acquires an enemy. His name was Frederick Solly Flood, Attorney General of Gibraltar, Advocate General of the Vice Admiralty Court, a man of florid sentences and unshakable certainty. He looked at the silent ship and smelled, immediately, blood. To Solly Flood, the story the salvors told was simply impossible. Sound ships were not abandoned. Sober crews did not vanish. Therefore someone was lying, and the men who profited from the findings stood nearest to hand. He ordered the vessel surveyed inch by inch, and the surveyors primed to find villainy obliged. Strange cuts scored the bow, dark stains marked the deck planking, and beneath the captain's bed lay a sword. An ornate Italian blade, drawn from its scabbard and bearing, the Attorney General declared, the unmistakable traces of blood, wiped hastily, hidden badly. In his mind, the deck stains and the sword joined into one crimson story. The story went like this. The crew had broken into the cargo of raw alcohol, drunk themselves murderers, slaughtered Captain Briggs, his wife, his child and the mates, then fled in the boat to escape the gallows. It was a lurid theory with one inconvenient flaw. The cargo was commercial alcohol, poisonous, foul, nearly undrinkable. No sailor got pleasantly drunk on it, he got violently ill, but Solly Flood was never slowed by chemistry. When mutiny faltered, he reached for conspiracy. Perhaps Briggs and Morehouse, old acquaintances said by some to have dined together the night before sailing, had staged the whole abandonment, plotting to split the salvage money between them. That accusation carried its own fatal flaw. Briggs owned a share of his own ship. He could not profit from a fraud whose payout was smaller than what he already possessed. The arithmetic never troubled the Attorney General. Meanwhile, science was quietly doing its work. Dr. J. Patron, a Gibraltar physician, scraped the ominous stains from the deck and the sword, and subjected them to careful analysis. His conclusion was unambiguous. No blood, none, anywhere. And here the court did something quietly damning. It did not announce the result. Patron's report was sealed and withheld, so that outside the courtroom the stains remained blood, and rumor was left free to run unrebutted. Sword, too, surrendered its menace under honest light. It was an old blade, the kind of souvenir sea captains carried home, its blood nothing more sinister than rust, a curiosity beneath a bed, not a murder weapon. One by one the theories fell apart. The cuts in the bow were splintered wood, not axe strokes. The stains were not blood. The sword was rust. No struggle, no bodies, no motive survived any real scrutiny. A courtroom can lose an argument and still win the atmosphere. For 3 long months the hearings ground on, December into March, and every session steeped the silent ship a little deeper in insinuation. Oliver Deveau sat through it like a man on trial. His seamanship was questioned, his honesty probed, his account picked apart, as if bringing a derelict safely to port had become an offense requiring explanation. In March 1873, the court finally released the Mary Celeste and announced its award, roughly £1,700 to the salvors. Ship and cargo together were worth perhaps 5 times that sum. The message required no explanation. A salvage of such difficulty and daring, half a crew sailing 2 ships 600 miles through winter seas, might ordinarily command a third of the value, even half. 1/5 was not payment, it was a verdict. The court had proved nothing against these men, so it punished them the only way it could, quietly in the ledger. Unspoken suspicion was priced into every shilling it withheld from their reward. The salvors walked away insulted. Deveau returned to obscurity and the sea, and David Morehouse, who had answered a drifting ship's silence exactly as a good mariner should, carried the stain of Gibraltar for the rest of his life. Solly Flood lost every argument and won the war. His blood that was not blood, his sword that was only rust, seeped out of the courtroom and into the newspapers, and from there into legend. The poison had entered the story. When a ship is found sailing without her people, the human mind reaches first for human villains: mutiny, piracy, fraud, murder. In the winter of 1872, investigators reached for all of them, one by one. We have already watched Gibraltar's Attorney General embrace the darkest version: crewmen crazed on stolen cargo, slaughtering the captain, his wife, his child, now set his courtroom aside and weigh that theory on its own merits. It is a theory that collapses on its first fact. The barrels held industrial alcohol, raw poisonous spirit, meant for fortifying Italian wine. No sailor could drink it and rage. He could only drink it and die. Flood pointed to a sword found beneath the captain's berth, to marks on the rails he read as blood. Science answered him even then. The stains were not blood. The blade bore only rust. And there was no wreckage of violence anywhere aboard. No shattered cabin, no overturned furniture, no wound in the woodwork. 10 people do not die fighting without leaving a single mark upon their world. Consider, too, the men accused Briggs had chosen them carefully. The Lorenzen brothers and their German shipmates carried quiet, respectable records. Their families waited at home, writing letters that would never be answered. And mutineers mutiny for something. Yet the captain's valuables lay untouched. The crew's own sea chests, their pay, their papers, all abandoned. Whatever happened aboard the Mary Celeste, no one profited from it. So suspicion drifted outward, toward the sea's older predators. The Azores lie on old raiding waters. Some whispered of riff pirates out of Morocco, boarding in the night and carrying 10 souls away. But pirates are thieves before they are anything else. 1,700 barrels of alcohol sat unplundered in the hold. The captain's possessions, the ship's instruments of value, the vessel herself, all left behind. A raider who kills 10 people and takes nothing is not a raider. He is an invention, a shape we give the dark, because an empty ship is somehow worse than a plundered one. Then there is the coldest theory of all, insurance fraud, that someone arranged the ship's abandonment for money, a scheme of paperwork and premiums, with 10 lives as the cost of doing business. But follow the money, and it leads nowhere. James Winchester, the ship's principal owner, gained nothing and lost heavily. The vessel survived. There was no sinking to collect on, no windfall, no payout logic at all. Briggs himself had bought into the ship, a part owner sailing his own investment, with his own wife and daughter aboard. Men do not stage the destruction of their livelihood with their family inside it. Which leaves the most persistent accusation of all, the one that has followed David Morehouse for 150 years. The man who found the ship, the story goes, must have emptied it. The conspiracy writes itself. 2 captains acquainted in New York agree that one will abandon his ship and the other will discover her, splitting a salvage fortune. It is tidy. It is also impossible. Impossible, because the plan requires murder, the silencing of 10 witnesses, among them a 2-year-old girl. It requires a respected Nova Scotia captain to become a mass killer for a share of salvage money. And for what reward? The Gibraltar court, dripping with suspicion, awarded Morehouse and his crew a fraction of the ship's value, 1/5, grudgingly given. He risked everything in this theory, for almost nothing. No evidence against him has ever surfaced. Not a document. Not a confession. Not a body. The courts cleared him. History has kept him on trial anyway, because someone had to stand in the empty space. Stand back then, and count the wreckage of theories. Mutiny, no violence, no motive. Piracy, nothing taken. Fraud, no one paid. Conspiracy, no proof, no gain. Every human explanation dies on the same quiet deck. And that is the verdict this far into the file. Whatever emptied the Mary Celeste, it was not the greed or malice of men, which leaves only one suspect still standing, the sea itself. Set aside the mutineers, the pirates, the phantom killers. The ocean needs no villain to empty a ship, so the theorists turned to the sea itself, and asked what the water could have done to the Mary Celeste. Begin with the waterspout, a tornado walking on water, a spinning column of wind and spray that can rise from a calm horizon in minutes, strike a single vessel, and vanish as though it had never existed. Inside a waterspout, the air pressure drops violently. To sailors caught in one, the world becomes chaos, shrieking wind, blinding spray, a ship heeling under a force that arrives without warning and obeys no rule of weather. And it fits fragments of the evidence. A waterspout could drive water into the hold, it could smash the binnacle and shatter the compass, and that sudden pressure drop could make the pump well read falsely deep. But here the theory stumbles. A spout violent enough to panic a master like Briggs should have wrecked her aloft. Instead her masts stood, her hull was sound, and the tattered sails matched days of unmanned drifting. So consider a stranger possibility, one the crew could never have named, because it strikes from beneath. The Azores are volcanic islands, born of a restless seam in the earth, and the sea floor there sometimes moves. Sailors call it a seaquake. An undersea tremor sends shock waves up through the water, and a ship above feels them as a violent shuddering, as if she had struck rock in the open ocean, 1,000 fathoms of nothing below. The phenomenon is real and documented. Ships have reported it for centuries, and a seaquake near the Azores could have jolted the Mary Celeste's cargo hard, 1,700 barrels of raw alcohol, grinding and shifting in the dark hole. Jolted barrels could weep alcohol, fumes could rise, small leaks could spring along strained seams. A crew who felt their ship shudder over nothing, then smelled vapor gathering below, might reasonably fear she was about to explode. It is an elegant theory. Terror without a wound. A seaquake frightens. It rarely destroys. It could explain why the ship survived whatever her crew fled, and yet the vessel Gibraltar examined showed no fire, no explosion, no scorching anywhere. Others proposed a rogue wave, one of those freak walls of water the ocean occasionally raises, towering above the swell around it, capable of sweeping a deck clean of everything, and everyone, standing upon it. But a wave that swept 10 people overboard would have left its signature: smashed hatches, a flooded cabin, salt-soaked ruin below. The boarders from the Dei Gratia found an interior damp but orderly, and a ship entirely seaworthy. Which leaves the quietest theory of all, not a monster of wind or water, but a simple instrument, telling a simple lie. To measure water in the hold, a sailor lowers a sounding rod down a narrow pipe. The rod comes up marked with a waterline like a dipstick, and the captain reads his ship's health from it. It is a humble ritual performed daily, trusted absolutely on the Mary Celeste. It may have failed. Remember what the boarders found: one of the ship's 2 pumps drawn apart on deck, disassembled as if someone had been troubleshooting it, a crew trying to understand why their pump was not behaving as it should. The ship had carried coal on an earlier voyage, and she had just been refitted. Coal dust and construction debris fouling the pumps and the sounding pipe could make a sound ship read like a sinking one. Picture Briggs after days of heavy weather, one pump apart and useless, the other giving readings he cannot trust, a rod telling him the water below is rising. He cannot see into the packed hold to check. By this theory, the Mary Celeste was never dying at all. Her captain only believed she was a careful man with his wife and daughter aboard, doing arithmetic on false numbers, with Santa Maria Island in sight. Waterspout, seaquake, rogue wave, a lying rod, each explains a fragment: the water in the hold, the broken compass, the fear. But notice what every natural theory must still account for, and cannot: what was missing. The yawl was launched, not torn away. The chronometer, the sextant, the ship's papers gathered and taken. Whatever the sea did to the Mary Celeste, the leaving itself was deliberate, ordered, and that changes everything. In Genoa, months later, The cargo came ashore under the eyes of insurance surveyors. 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, counted one by one. 1,701 minus 9. 9 barrels were empty. And those 9 barrels shared one detail the others did not. They were made of red oak. Every other barrel in that hold was white oak, dense, tight-grained, nearly waterproof. Red oak is porous. Red oak breathes. Through those breathing staves, some 450 gallons of raw alcohol had seeped away, not as liquid pooling where a sounding rod would find it, but as vapor, invisible, rising into a sealed and sunless hold. Now set that hold beneath 2 weeks of November gales. Hatches battened tight, no ventilation, the cargo shifting and chafing in every sea. Day after day the fumes accumulate in the dark, heavier than air, waiting. Then comes the morning of November 25th. The storms finally break. The sun climbs and warms the deck planking, and beneath it the trapped vapor expands, pressing upward against hatches that have been sealed for days. Perhaps there was a sound, a dull rumble deep in the hold, a hiss of escaping gas at the seams. Perhaps a hatch cover lifted. Remember, the boarders from the Dei Gratia found 2 hatches open, covers lying on the deck. Benjamin Briggs did not like this cargo. He was a temperance man, carrying 1,700 barrels of alcohol, a substance he knew could burn, could explode, could turn a wooden ship into a torch in open water. And he was not weighing the risk alone. Sarah was aboard. Sophia was aboard, 2 years old. Somewhere below decks, above that murmuring cargo, a master alone might wait and observe. A father cannot. He sounds the pumps and cannot trust the answer. One pump, remember, was found disassembled on deck, its valve drawn. Someone had been trying to learn what was happening inside a hull he could no longer read. And there off the bow is land. Santa Maria, southernmost of the Azores, perhaps 6 miles distant in the clearing light. If ever there were a moment to step away from a suspect ship, it is now. So Briggs gives the only order that fits everything found afterward. Not panic, not flight, a precaution. Everyone into the yawl. We stand off, we watch, and if she does not burn, we row back and reboard. The evidence agrees. The chronometer, the sextant, the navigation book, the ship's papers gone, gathered up by a man expecting to need them. The crew's sea chests, oilskins, pipes, left behind by men expecting to return. And the peak halyard, that long stout rope found broken and trailing astern, becomes the tether. Pay it out over the rail, make the yawl fast, and let a few hundred feet of line hold you to your ship. Picture them there, 10 people in one small boat, rising and falling on the swell, watching a brigantine that might explode, and might do nothing at all, waiting for the hold to clear, waiting to go home. Then the wind freshens, the way November winds do, without warning. Mary Celeste, sails still drawing, gathers way. The line comes taut, dragging the overloaded yawl through the water, and somewhere along its length, it parts. What follows takes only minutes. A brigantine under sail makes 6-7 knots. A crowded yawl under oars makes 2, perhaps 3, and not for long. The ship simply walks away from them, shrinking with terrible patience. 10 people, one small open boat, low in the water, miles of Atlantic between them and Santa Maria, miles of current and rising sea. No wreckage was ever found. No bodies. The ocean rarely returns small boats. Rank this reconstruction against the evidence, item by item. The missing yawl, explained. The missing instruments, explained. The open hatches, the disassembled pump, the broken halyard, the position off Santa Maria, and those 9 red oak barrels, explained. The rival theories still stand in the record. A waterspout that drenched the decks, and false sounded the well, a seaquake, some sudden terror of sinking. Each accounts for some of the facts, none accounts for so many, so economically. But say it plainly, nothing is proven, no court ever ruled on a cause. No survivor ever spoke, and the sea kept its counsel. This is only the story the evidence tells best, of a careful man, 10 yards too cautious. The hearings ended. The ship survived them. Her name did not. From the moment she left Gibraltar, the Mary Celeste carried something heavier than cargo, a reputation. Sailors have a word for vessels like her. Unlucky. And sailors believe in luck the way bankers believe in ledgers. Crews refused to sign aboard her. Merchants hesitated to trust her with freight. She was sound, seaworthy, well built, and nobody wanted to touch her. So she was sold, and sold again. Over the next 12 years she passed through the hands of some 17 owners, each one losing money, each one passing her along like a debt no one could collect. Then in January 1884, something strange happened. Not at sea but on paper. A London magazine, The Cornhill, published an anonymous short story by a struggling young doctor from Portsmouth named Arthur Conan Doyle. It was called J. Habakkuk Jepson's Statement, a survivor's confession from a ghost ship found abandoned, told with such convincing documentary calm that some readers and some newspapers mistook it for fact. Doyle changed the name, Mary Celeste, with an I and an E, and invented the details the world still repeats. The warm meals waiting on the cabin table, the tea still steaming, breakfast interrupted mid-bite. None of it was ever in Deveau's testimony, none of it was in the court record, but the fiction was better than the truth, simpler, eerier, warmer, and fiction once loose does not come back. The legend was born in 1884. The ship herself had 1 year left to live, and her ending would be uglier than anything Doyle imagined. In 1885 she came under her last master, Captain Gilman Parker of Massachusetts. Parker loaded her in Boston with cargo that was nearly worthless, old boots, spoiled fish, cat food, and insured it as valuable goods. Then he sailed her south, into the Gulf of Gonave off Haiti, straight toward a coral shelf called the Rochelois Reef, and with a clear sky and a fair wind, he ran her onto it, deliberately. He drove her up on the coral at full sail, ripped her bottom out, and set about stripping and burning what remained, then filed his claim, as if the sea had simply taken another unlucky ship. But the insurers had seen too many convenient wrecks. They investigated, the valuable cargo was traced, the manifests unraveled, and the fraud came apart in the open sworn testimony, all of it. Parker was charged, and in the American courts of 1885 the crime he'd committed, wrecking one's own ship, could carry the death penalty. The case collapsed short of conviction, but it destroyed him. Within months he was dead. And that was the end of the Mary Celeste, broken on a reef, burned for insurance money, dying in a disgrace she had done nothing to earn. The ship was never the mystery, she was only the witness. So leave the ship on her reef, and come back one last time to the people. Benjamin Briggs, 37 years old, a captain, other captains respected, sober, careful, devout, part owner of his own vessel. Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, who brought her melodeon aboard so there would be music on the ocean. And Sophia Matilda, their daughter 2 years old, who had crossed no ocean before this one. And the 7 men who worked her: Albert Richardson, the trusted first mate, Andrew Gilling, Edward Head, the young steward and cook, and the 4 Germans, the Lorenzen brothers, Arian Martens, Gottlieb Goodschad. 10 people, no wreckage, no bodies, no message, nothing was ever found. They stepped off a sound ship into an empty ocean, and the sea closed over the question and kept the answer. Perhaps that is why, a century and a half later, we are still standing at that rail with Oliver Deveau, looking down at an abandoned deck, not because the mystery is unsolvable, but because it is human. This case file stays open, but there are others. December 1900, a lighthouse on a bare Atlantic rock, 3 keepers, a locked door, a stopped clock, and no one left to wind it. Case file de 02, the Flannan Isles.